Two economic superpowers now holding court, the U.S. and China beginning 2 days of high-level talks on the economy, hosted by Treasury Secretary Geithner and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. CNBC's Hampton Pearson is at the White House with an update for us. Hi, Hampton.
Hi, Sue. And President Obama joined his Treasury Secretary and Secretary of State for the opening of this strategic and economic dialogue with China. And both the President and Treasury Secretary pretty much on the same page in their message to the Chinese. When it comes to the economy, it's time to rebalance the U.S.-China relationship.
As Americans save more and Chinese are able to spend more, we can put growth on a more sustainable foundation. Because just as China has benefited from substantial investment and profitable exports, China can also be an enormous market for American goods.
China's success in shifting the structure of the economy towards domestic demand-led growth, including a greater role for spending by consumers, will be a huge contribution to our global challenge in bringing about a more rapid but more balanced and more sustainable global recovery.
Now, Treasury Secretary Geithner, Secretary of State Clinton will lead talks with Vice Premier Wang and State Councilor Dai, who's a top diplomatic and national security expert. China is America's top creditor, holding more than $768 billion in U.S. Treasury securities. Top Chinese officials did not mention their concerns about trillion-dollar U.S. budget deficits and the possible impact on the dollar. Vice Premier Wang instead chose to accentuate the positive, emphasizing cooperation between the two global economic superpowers in stemming the global financial crisis.
Thanks to the policy measures adopted by the U.S. government, the U.S. financial markets are also stabilizing.
And the U.S. wants China's cooperation in leading global financial reform as well as on climate change. The two countries recognize their differences. President Obama talking about human rights, a top Chinese official saying China will never be the U.S. and the U.S. will never be China. Sue?
Thank you very much, Hampton. Before we go on and talk about this, Bill, you were mentioning the TIPS auction.
The 20-year TIP auction has, the results are in 2.387%. Was the coupon. I'm trying to get a read on what the non-tips, what the treasuries are doing to this right now. The bid-to-cover ratio is 2.27. Santelli's not around to give us perspective on that, but that sounds decent for a tips auction. You're not going to get the kind of fireworks that you would on a traditional treasury auction, but this is the beginning, as we mentioned earlier, of a record $235 billion that will be auctioned off by the federal government this week.
That we hope a lot of the people who are buying will be the Chinese.
Yes,
right, exactly. Because they've been diversifying out of that, out of the Treasury market a little bit, which we're going to talk about right now, and other things. Because when it comes to our economic interests, should the U.S. consider China a friend or a foe? Some thoughts now from our panel of experts. Former White House economic advisor Daniel Rosen, now a principal at the Rhodium Group, and former Undersecretary of Commerce Robert Shapiro, now chairman of SoNCon. Nice to have you here, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Here. Dan, I'll start with you if I could. Does it have to be friend or foe, or can it be a little bit of both?
Well, it's certainly going to be a lot of both. The thing about that question is it's up to us to decide what the answer is. If we do the management of our economy that we need to, we will make China a friend. And likewise, if China does the adjustment we've been talking about for years, they will make themselves a great customer for U.S. goods, and they will put themselves in a position where they're naturally a partner to us.
Are you talking about the currency adjustment?
Oh, you know, currency is really a side issue, especially at this dialogue. It's definitely something that's there. It's got to adjust. Currencies are meant to adjust. I'm talking about China's domestic interest rates. That has a big impact on how much Chinese households have to consume at the end of the day. The bad news is that China is not going to adjust anything for altruistic reasons to help us out. The good news is everything they have to do for their own domestic imperatives and reasons is the stuff we need them to do in order to be a partner to us.
And Robert, Dan says that we've got to take care of our financial house in order to make the decision whether or not China is going to be a friend or a foe. How do we do that when we're doing $235 billion worth of government borrowing in a week?
Well, what we have to do is take care of our longer-term fiscal situation. That's what bothers China. China is certainly not bothered by large deficits in the midst of the worst global and U.S. domestic downturn in 80 years. I think she's grateful for that. In fact, China was the country which stimulated the other country besides the United States that stimulated very early and at a very large scale, whereas Europe lagged far behind both in scale and in timing. So I think what they're looking for is some indication that the administration and Congress will address the long-term budget deficits in the way that the Clinton administration did in the 1990s.
You know, Dan, you dismissed the currency question. For a time, that was front and center in our relationship with China. What happened to that?
Currency has been a big issue over the past 5 years because it's relatively easy to talk about. It's something you guys talk about and see every day. It's pretty easy to get the number. You can come up with a fairly good estimate of how much it's undervalued, say, against the dollar. The story there is maybe 20% today. The reason why it's not getting singular attention right now is that over the past 18 months, it has moved in the right direction. And moreover, because even if and when China's currency does more fully adjust, that's not really going to change the fundamental structural problem that we have with one another in the long run.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.